So let's get back. Nice try to avoid that user question. So if you have ever been accused of being a user, or you've accused somebody else, you know that it's not very fun. It means you're selfish, you're controlling, you're taking advantage of people, you're not giving, you're just taking. And really, the sophisticated subtext is you're a bad person. Then there are some of us who our friends may have been concerned that we are being used in relationships or a relationship. And if we're the one who is getting used, then we're like a victim, we're weak, we're powerless, we have low self-esteem. Sophisticated subtext, we're a wimp. Which for some of us is really even worse than being the bad person, you know. I don't want to be a bad person, but I don't want to be a wimp. So using and being used is our, I don't know what the correct verb is, hallmarks of dysfunction in relationships. And so therefore it's something that we kind of get programmed, hopefully, if we want to be nice people and powerful people, to avoid in life, right? Or is that always true? I've been doing, see, I'm weird, I'm doing a Paul Harvey. There's a rest of the story. Even though I'm way much too young to know who Paul Harvey is, as are you. None of us got that reference, so we'll just pretend it's not there. Well, here's the thing. In our relationship with Spirit, those very things that cause us to be dysfunctional and put down on the outside world, on the human world, are actually not only appropriate, but I think as practitioners of this thing called the science of mind and spirit, which means all of us who are practicing, working, trying this stuff on day after day, and then forgetting and trying it back on, these are necessary steps in the evolution of our spiritual consciousness and our spiritual maturity. So let's look at that. Let's look at becoming a user. Maybe I should have just titled it that. You could say, well, my minister talked about becoming a user today. Go home, tell your spouse. That's what you learned, how to become a user. When we first come into this teaching, that's what we're introduced to. One of the main taglines of Ernest Holmes is there's a power for good in the universe and you can use it. So we are taught that we are not random victims in the universe, bumping around, hoping that the divine something will somehow show favor on us. No, we are shown that there is actually an aspect to this thing I call God that receives the impress of our thoughts, of our habitual patterns of thought, and actually brings them back into our existence. Once we learn that, we go, oh, then it is my job, if I kind of want my life to be a certain way, or want to have certain experiences in it, it is then my job, because it isn't anybody else's, to direct this thing called the law, to consciously use this thing we call the law. And so when we do this, it actually represents an evolution. Because that place of thinking it's random often has us feel weak and powerless. And it certainly has us in a place where we're blaming other people or the economy or the gods or our spouse or our friends or our job or our boss for how good my life is or isn't. So when we become a user in this way, we're actually stepping out of that victim mode. We're actually stepping into a consciousness of a responsibility, of taking responsibility for how good our life can be by becoming a user. So we do that, and that's, for many of us, a great learning to keep becoming aware of my thought, to say, am I letting my life happen, or am I remembering, wait a minute, what's my intention here? What would I really like to see happen? We spend years, many of us, in class, in our spiritual practices, keep waking up when life starts going in a weird direction, to wake up and say, okay, wait a minute, let me stop reacting to the junk that's going on. And remember, there's something I can use and intend and be conscious. So that occupies many of us for a long, long time, as it should, especially because we go home and see our families every once in a while. But what happens for many of us is we get to the place where that using and intending has brought its results. We see that we can draw into our lives the people, the experiences that we desire. And because this does require that we keep going to God in this thing we call affirmative prayer, to use the law requires that we go within and go to God, something happens. Something else happens that I personally think is the thing that we don't tell people in the beginning of Science of Mind. The thing that, in my reading of Ernest Holmes, I see happened in his evolution. That there comes a point when you keep going to God because I want this, I go to God because I want that, I go to God because I don't like this, and I know there's something better, so I keep going to God and going to God and going to God, and I get in that groove of going to God. And I get in that experience of going to God, and then I kind of forget what I was going to God for. And it's not a senior moment. It's not the senior moment. It's because I recognize that the going to God contains everything in it, in that experience, that I could ever want. It just happens to be beyond what my ego mind, my human personality, what I often call my small s self might want. And so as we start cherishing that relationship, something else happens. And we start moving from the idea of being users of this magnificent thing called the law of cause and effect, or the law of mind, to allowing ourselves being used, to be used. But we have to keep it very secret from a certain part of ourselves. Because it's a very different place to be. And it's also, as I was writing this, it's a very difficult place to talk about in our teaching. Not because we haven't experienced it, not because you guys don't get what I'm talking about, but because when we talk about opening up to allow ourselves to be used by God, we're talking about surrendering, not my will, but thine. We are surrendering our ego, small s self, and it can sound like separation. And as I was being with this talk, the specter of Carol Carnes came in my head. And again, this is what's so great about the two cultures coming together because we have such great teachers. And what I love is because when I've got the specter of tarot cards, are you talking about separation? Just whose will do you think it is? Whoop. Then it helps me think about, how do I really say this? Because our human words set up that dichotomy. So I'll use somebody else's. Jesus, the Christ, said, you must lose your life to find it. And I think that's what he was talking about, that we have to give up what we think is important. We have to give up the things that we think we're identified with, the things that make us up, and go beyond what perhaps our self-identified intentions are. But we're not going to an outside force. We are not letting God impose some will that is entirely different from anything we might ever wanted. I'm trying to remember who said it once. Somebody who was just sure if she let God's will be hers, that she was going to be in India, up to her knees in mud and pestilence and all that, God's will is only for our difficulty. We all have to do the Mother Teresa, that's it. And if we remember, Mother Teresa was in love an awful lot of that time. But in any case, this becoming used by God sounds like we're allowing something different to take us over. And for those of us who've been so used to being users, in the Science of Mind way, we can wonder, how does that really work? Because we sometimes forget that there is this mystic tradition that Ernest Holmes was drawing from as well. And this is why I love, and I know most of you who are visitors today have worked with this. We just finished our first visioning class here. And although I have led visionings over the years, to do them on an ongoing basis and to really teach it has been new, and it has been such a precious experience. For those of you who have not really done visioning, it's a very simple process, but it is different than visualizing. It is different than allowing myself to see what it is that I want. Instead, in visioning, we get very still and ask a question that is very different or may sound different from what we have asked before, and that is, what is Spirit's vision for my life? What is Spirit's vision for my relationship? What is Spirit's vision for my work or for a project I might be encountering? And it can be challenging first, again, with Carol Carnes. Well, how is Spirit's vision different from my vision? And if we go there, we're going to kind of get off track. So we just start asking the question and realizing that it's not that we go someplace different. It's just we go deeper. We reach beyond that small s self into that which truly is the ground of our being, that is that God, that spiritual magnificence, the real magnificence that is deeper and broader and more expansive than often what we create as earthly success. Not that there's anything wrong with earthly success. But as we do that, as we say, what is Spirit's vision? It's as if we wake up, I think, to a part of us we haven't quite been listening to. We wake up to a current that's been running in us forever, but that we just perhaps haven't been awake to. And it isn't that it goes against something our ego has figured out that it wants, most of the time, but that it becomes the truer yearning, I think, the answer to the truer yearning that we have. That we think, if I have this job, I'm going to be happy. If I have this relationship, I'm going to be happy. If I'm at this weight, I'm going to be happy. You know what happens? You lose weight and your pants get too big. This was a realization I had. Oh, great. Still look schlumpy. So, maybe weight's not the real issue. But it's that kind of thing. That yearning to be this or be that or have this different or that different, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's our the bike, the training wheel. That's our training wheels. But when we ask, what is Spirit's vision for this project, my life, my whatever, we get to a truer answer. That is the fulfillment that we have been truly looking for, but that perhaps life has taught us could be found through some externals. And it's not either or. Thank you, David, for being here. It's transcend and include, transcend and include. And in fact, for those of us who still go, yeah, that sounds an awful lot like, oh, I'm just going to surrender to God's will, whatever it is, and just put up with life, just not quite being fun, but I'm surrendered to God's will. So even though it's not very much fun, it's kind of hard, I'm surrendered to God's will, so I know there's something noble about that, I hope. Yeah, well, I'm not talking about that. Really. We have to go through the user phase, see? And that's the difference. For many of us who were raised in very traditional, not progressive Christianity, whatever we want to call it, there is never, or I shouldn't say that anymore, but when I was growing up, there wasn't the opportunity to be empowered. But, so that when you say surrender to God's will, it sounds like, yep, okay, I'm going to stay being the victim and take what I get. But when we have gone through that step of becoming, what I'm calling the user, of taking responsibility, of knowing that we can use this thing called the law, that we can trust God to bring into our lives that which we desire, that we have a power. There's a power we can harness, and the power is right here. When we go through that stage, from that place, when we make the surrender and allow ourselves to be used, then we do it in an authentic way, in a spiritually mature way, as spiritual adults rather than spiritual children. You might remember adolescence, or you might remember having adolescence. When they bend to your will, there's something that's not authentic about it, and it's fits and starts and not really fun for anybody. When we come into a true understanding, and this is the power of bowing our head. This can be the power of being on our knees. When we do that of our own choice with our full power, then we powerfully open to something newer, something greater, something deeper, ever true. And lest you think that Ernest Holmes didn't go there. He did. He did. I was looking, and I didn't find something where he said used by God, so, any of you who can give me the citation. But he does have meditations like this in the textbook, The Science of Mind, what we call the textbook. Spirit within me, command my soul to do thy bidding. And when we do that, the end of this meditation says, let the journey of my soul find its completion in thee. That's what we find when, as spiritual adults, knowing our power, we surrender. We allow ourselves to be used. And so, here's the thing. We can take anything. We can take any songs and make them work for us. And so, even though after I reread the lyrics, I knew that we didn't want to go there, I knew that there was a way to end this talk, to just all let us go back to the truth from Brother Bill Withers. So, Carrie, are you going to help me with this? They're getting ready to help me with this. I love, by the way, flexible musicians. 0 hour, I've got an idea. So I think most of you know this is the gospel of Bill Withers. The gospel we're going to spread about feeling good, being used, and having that surrender. So let's all sing it together. Here we go.
You guys got to help us out on this because we don't have our bass player today. So here we go. Keep going. Don't let me down.
Off.
I just want to spread the news. If it feels this good getting used.